Just a few notes here as to how we operate. I'm sure some of you have been here before, so you understand how it works. When you have an idea in your mind to ask us, one of the legislators, all you need to do is be able to get to a mic. If there's a lot, I would suggest you line up just like an airport, next to a mic so you're ready to go, so we can keep the conversation going and not waste a minute of the time that we have here. You have a couple of minutes to present your question, and the legislators have 3 minutes to answer the question. Jim has come up with a new technique. Visual, it used to be sound, but then the sound we couldn't hear. He's got this stoplight here now. He's one of the state troopers, I think. When it's on green, you're talking. When it's on yellow, it's caution. You're almost done. And when it's red, you want to stop if you can. And I don't have a big whip out here to do that, to make you stop. But if the conversation's going and it's productive, that's the way we want to go. We always start out this morning with the legislators introducing themselves. If there's a lot of them here, it's easier for all of them. If there's only 2 or 3 of them here this morning, I think they keep coming in, so that's a good sign. Claire's right there by the mic. Terry's going to get by that mic right off. Chris, introduce themselves and what they're working on, and then after that we'll start with questions. Thank you very much. This mic is available too up here, by the way. You guys that are in the middle.
Good morning, my name is Claire Eyre. I live in Addison. I'm serving in my 16th year in the Senate, representing all the towns of Addison County as well as Huntington and Buellscore. In the morning I chair Senate Health and Welfare. In the afternoon I'm on Senate Government Operations. I work mostly on healthcare and human services, and I'll be happy to talk to you about that after.
And over on this side, good morning, my name is Chris Bray. I live in New Haven. I'm your second Addison County Senator, along with Senator Eyre. My morning committee, which I chair, is Natural Resources and Energy, and in the afternoons I serve on Education.
Representative Terry Norris. I represent Benson, Orwell, Shoreham, and Whiting, and I serve on the Ag and Forestry Committee. We are presently working on a couple of Senate bills to deal with rural economic development and forestry, basically a right to forest law.
Good morning, Peter Conlon from Cornwall. I'm in the House and I represent Salisbury, Cornwall, Leicester, Ripton, Goshen, and Hancock. I'm on the House Education Committee. Like Terry and most of us in the House, we're now working on bills that have come from the Senate into our House committees. We're currently looking at some issues surrounding the pre-kindergarten program, otherwise known as Act 166 in the state, as well as a large miscellaneous ed bill that's got all sorts of things in it.
Good morning, I'm Robin Scheid. I'm one of 2 representatives from Middlebury in the House, and finishing up my first term there. I sit on House Corrections and Institutions. Corrections is our correctional facilities throughout the state, and the institutions part is all the money that the state borrows, the bonded dollars that we use for capital construction and many other things. So we just passed that out to the Senate.
Harvey, the mic is yours.
Yes. Good morning, Harvey Smith. I serve on the House Agriculture and Forestry Committee, and I sit with Terry Norris.
Good turnout as usual. I really thank the legislators for being here and to answer questions. One thing that you want to do when you get up to the mic is introduce yourself and what town you're from before you start your question. So we're ready for the first question. Who's up there? We're in a short meeting today. Mike is right there.
I'm Lori Cox from Ripton, and I would like to find out, and probably this goes to Claire, where things are moving at this point on the the bill that you had, and I can't think of its name, but the one that kind of got, well, from my point of view, the legs chopped off of it, but
Primary care.
primary care, yes. Where you see that going at this point?
Thank you. Universal primary care passed the Senate in sort of as a shadow of its former self, but it did have some legs. It in fact was more likely to be signed by the governor because it didn't commit us to necessarily tax financing healthcare. It committed us to look at all options so everybody could have primary care without copays, without barriers, for a narrow set of services for screening pretty much. It left the committee and left the Senate on time, on schedule, and somehow ended up in the committee that's called Rules in the House because they said it didn't make it on time. So I took over a bunch of paperwork showing when it moved through all the different committees and off the floor to the House yesterday afternoon or Friday afternoon, and I expect they'll have it settled Tuesday morning. But a Senate member cannot ask the House to deal with its own rules. It has to be a House member who does it.
Is somebody from the House going to do that?
Yes, Brian Chena from Burlington is going to do it. He's one of the sponsors for it. It's kind of a tough lift. It's bringing back the idea of universal, of single payer and that sort of thing. A lot of people felt burned by the experience, a lot of hard work, and then we couldn't get it done. So, and then we have a governor who says he's not going to sign any bills that require new revenue. So doesn't have the kind of enthusiasm that it might have had a couple of years ago, or maybe a couple of years from now. So I keep stirring the pot.
Be sure when you use the mic, use it like a lollipop, be right close to it. We're being televised for the educational channel, so they need to hear what's going on. Next item, where one of the legislators want to speak about something? Nobody's jumping up and down. Nobody's worried about gun control. That was last week, and the week before, and the week before.
So I'm Heidi Willis from Salisbury. Sorry, haven't talked to anybody this morning. So I'm just, this is a combination maybe, and I'm not sure there's anything that's going on about this, but I'm thinking it's something we need to think about. Combination of water quality and dairy question, coming after all the reading and articles about Nordic farms going out, and Clark Hinsdale's comments about the fate of smaller dairy in the state being very grim, and it just sounded to me like, okay, we're heading towards maybe 100 large farm operations in the state, which has all kinds of interesting ramifications, not only for water quality, but as a person who works part-time at the Morgan Horse Farm with tourists, and I've had people come and say, we came to Vermont to see cows, and we can't see any cows, so but at any rate, yeah, cows at the Morgan Horse Farm. No, they're not there either. But at any rate, my question is, are we going to start, we need to start thinking maybe about the economic structure or whatever, but the ramifications to me for moving to mostly large farms as opposed to, and we're talking about what, 250 to 500 cow farms are considered small farms now? The ramifications on water quality, I think, are big, so. It's not anything that anybody's talking about right now, but I just thought if we needed a topic to talk about.
Thank you.
Wow, that's a tough question. But the world's changing. And unfortunately, we're in a world marketing situation for the agriculture community. And right now, there's basically a surplus of milk in the world, not just in Vermont. in the U.S. Milk prices have gone down, and at the third year in a row that milk prices have been low, it's putting a tremendous amount of financial stress on all farmers, whether you're a large farm or small farm or medium-sized farm. Organic farmers are feeling the same kind of a pinch. Organic milk prices have come down as well. There isn't hardly anybody that's taken on a new milk producer today. It's the first time in my lifetime that I've seen that happen. If somebody wanted to start up an operation, there really isn't a market for their milk right now. So we are seeing some significant changes. And I will say that the largest of the large dairy farms in Vermont are feeling the struggle, as well as the smaller ones. The medium-sized farms seems to be the ones that are in the most financial stress right now. The smaller farms, they may not be in as much financial stress because they're usually older generations who have quite a lot of equity that they've built up. So in some cases that's the case. Unfortunately, there isn't any way to transfer those farms to a young person who wants to get in and start with a smaller operation. So we're at a crossroads here in Vermont, and one of the struggles we've seen in the Agriculture Committee is how are we going to transition our farms into something different than dairy, and how is it going to happen? And we're running into some barriers. If a farm has been left vacant for a couple of years and somebody comes in and wants to start it up again, they're finding it a real challenge simply because it's a change in use for the neighbors. It's not a continuous use of the agricultural operation. So what I'm saying is, and I know I'm going to run out of time, but we're really running into some real challenges from a whole bunch of different areas, different directions. But I will say on the water quality front, I think the agriculture community has done a fantastic job in stepping up to the plate to address those issues. Matter of fact, we should be proud of the agriculture community, the dairy community, for stepping up to the plate. And I give you one example. Yes, they are a large source of phosphorus going into the lake. 40% goes into the Lake Champlain Basin area. It's attributed to agriculture. However, the agriculture community has agreed to clean up 59% of the phosphorus going into the lake. So they have really taken a leadership role and a commitment to make things happen in that direction. And I'm convinced that they're going to be able to do it. When I first started looking at the numbers that the EPA and the state was asking the agriculture community to clean up, they looked like huge numbers, and I really didn't see how they'd be able to do it. But when I started thinking about it on individual practices on an individual acre of land, and saw that if you went from conventional tillage to minimum tillage to no tillage, in other words, just planting the crop into an existing hay crop or something like that, reduces the surface of the soil, the soil to prevents it from running off. But when I started looking at it in that light, I said, you know, this is doable. But when you first look at the numbers, you think that you just can't do it. But I'm convinced we can. Thanks.
I was first elected to the House in '06 and went to the Agriculture Committee. And just before I got there, and one of the first things that ever came up to vote on was milk price subsidies, checks written by the state of Vermont to dairy farmers. We paid out $11 million during a low point in milk prices. And that was, so it was a very tough period of milk prices. Reminds me a lot of right now, a decade later. The challenge, I mean, there's a lot of challenges to the entire dairy sector and agriculture more generally, but where's the price of milk come from? It's set by a federal milk market administrator down around Boston, and that individual has one charge, and that is to supply and make sure that there's an adequate supply of milk in the Northeast. And they're not looking to make sure that farmers are making a decent living or that their costs are balanced out by they're meeting costs of production, any of that. So we end up with a price basically as low as possible that inspires enough people to go out and milk cows and create milk for the milk shed. So it's always setting a low price, and it only gets pushed up when milk's in shorter supply for a reason here or there. Milk moves around a lot. So we've seen low milk prices for quite a while, and I think we're on this roller coaster for as long as we're in this system. On the other side, it's a strange market from the farmer's point of view. You could, not right now, but in general, historically, you could go out and add another 100 cows this week, and your co-op would take that milk away and quote unquote find a home for it. So it's not a market that's like most markets we participate in, where you need to watch what customers are willing to pay, and then you adjust how much you produce in order to participate in. When I was in my lifetime, I think Vermont has gone from roughly 11,000 dairy farms to around 840 right now. So it's been it's a long, steady reduction in the number. Milk volume stays up because we know how to get more milk from a cow. Farming practices have changed, but it's a system that's just under a tremendous amount of pressure. Where I think the bright spots, though, are that we've passed, some legislation to help farmers become more technically efficient. We've done farm diversification. Representative Smith was in dairy, now he's in beef. So think practices that were quite small on the landscape in terms of fruits, vegetables, beef, also other kinds of livestock. There's more and more of those. We're diversifying, and with a diversified income stream comes some greater stability. Another thing I'm leaving out is on-farm energy. So we have more and more farms producing energy as a revenue stream. We started with the very first, Foster's had a methane digester 30 years ago. The first cow power farm was out at Audette's in Bridport. There's another project coming along just up the road. So farming's tough. People keep on diversifying and finding ways to move forward. But I don't think we're ever going to say farming is going to be easy in our lifetimes.
My name is Chase Goodrich, and I'm here twofold representing the Champlain Valley Farmer Coalition, which is made up of farmers and local community members that focuses on water quality and kind of teaching and understanding what's going on-farm practice to improve our water quality. The second half, I'm here as a member of the Goodrich Family Farm right here in Salisbury. We are considered a large farm operation. I guess I don't really have a question. It's just a search for viability and what we can do to kind of help these dairy farms out in the community. To tell you about my business a little bit, farming has changed tremendously. It kind of hurts a little bit when we say that these large farms, it's only making the water quality worse. I think some of these large farms are the leaders in the technology of changing culture on the farm and improving water quality. Our farming practices are completely different from even when I came home in 2009 and rejoined the farm. We do no-till corn planting, cover cropping, and then as well as mentioning this energy thing, we've kind of been ahead of the curve as that as well. It's not ahead of the curve, but on the curve. For the past 8 years, we've been working on putting a methane digester on the farm that would similarly bring cow power 2.0 to the natural gas system. It's been extremely challenging. We've had a great partnership with Middlebury College, Vermont Gas, and now Vanguard Renewables, but what it would basically do is combine manure with food waste to create natural gas to help Middlebury's goal to become carbon neutral, as well as supply a renewable natural energy for Vermont Gas customers. And it's been extremely difficult, but we hope we're getting closer. It will have a complete phosphorus removal system to better improve our water quality. And those nutrients, we want them to stay in the field. They're extremely important. And I just got to say, farmers are the best caretakers of the land, because outside of their cows, that's the best asset they have, and they want to continue that tradition of farming. That's why I came home. I want to see the farm move in the future. I think there's no better way than to raise your family through the farm lifestyle, and that's kind of what I'm home to preserve and try to continue and move forward into the future. Any ways to help our viability would be greatly appreciated. Thank you.
Now, before you sit down, Chris, I was just wondering, do people really understand what no-till is and what the advantages of doing no-till and minimal-till are, conservation practices that we have? Could you kind of explain what you're doing?
Sure. So what we do is it kind of starts with our manure management. We do injection for our corn crop. We do injection manure systems, so that's subsurfaced. That manure is injected straight in the ground, so there is no runoff. And then cover cropping in the fall into the spring allows the root system to develop on that soil, so that when you go through with the corn planter, you're able to put the seeds in the ground without tilling up the land. So it's minimal impact. Those seeds go in the ground, and as it takes time to develop. But as you develop throughout the years with that process, the land gets better and better for the no-till. Those root systems develop, and it becomes actually a very viable way to plant your crops. If that helps.
It also substantially increases the organic matter and the material that's in the soil, and so what it does, it kind of regenerates the soil. It creates an environment for a lot of microorganisms to work in the soil itself, breaking down that organic matter, and in doing so, it actually over time, it'll create an opportunity to generate some of its own fertilizer, so we can actually have a reduction in the amount of fertilizer that we use on the farms.
And I can actually follow that up with another reason we're extremely excited about the possibility of having this digester come to the farm was when you add the food waste to the manure, that we would be able to actually, and with the phosphorus removal, actually move away from commercial fertilizers, and the urea, we could actually move away from that, and there's enough organic matter in the material getting spread on the field to digestate that the urea sprays that we have in the summer can actually go away, and we can use just the digestate from the digester.
One of the questions Heidi asked, oh, there you are, what I thought you asked was, what are we doing about farms and helping farmers stay in business? And I wanted to...
I want the farmers to stay in business.
Well, we all do. I did want to note, though, that, and it's been said, that a lot of the innovation in farm practices does come from large farms. So we have to remember that. They're the ones who have the kind of scale where they can afford to rent the equipment or hire the expertise. But in the state of Vermont, we spend $55 or $60 million a year for current the use value tax system, which is huge for large landowners, including forestry. So that's a big thing. We spend a lot of money through the Conservation and Housing Board, and when farmers sell their conservation rights on their farms, or other landowners sell their conservation rights, it makes that land more affordable. It lowers the tax base, but it makes that land more affordable for new farmers who want to come in. And for a long time, that was about the only way a new farmer could get into the business, was to buy a conserved farm. We also, through our federal tax dollars, pay for all kinds of wildlife and wetland. We worked on this together, wildlife and wetland programs that cost share with farmers to help them with their pollution, and help us and help others with water quality and wildlife issues. So there's a fair amount that's going in, but when there's too much milk in the market, it's hard to sell, it's hard to get a good price for their product.
A couple questions for Harvey. I'm Bob Burton, and I'm from Cornwall. I grew up dairy farming. What is the status of potentially subsidizing Vermont milk from other industries that benefit from the fact that we have farms in place and that they would stay there? That was one of them. The other question would be diversity, which Claire brought up some, but what is the status of diversity to help farms bridge the problem with the milk? And then the third one, which is beyond your, but you can tell us what's going on. Stabilizing milk production. Is there any efforts to stabilize that so that the existing farms don't take it on the chin? So my background leads me to those questions. How are these guys going to make it, and what can we do to help it? I agree.
Stabilizing milk prices. Wow, that's really a tough one because that's a national and an international issue right now. The state of Vermont doesn't have the horsepower to do a program like Chris was talking about. $11 million went into the dairy industry a few years ago. There really isn't any way to capture those dollars out of the marketplace in order to do it. Maine has a program where they do it, but they have a shortage of milk in the state of Maine, so they can capture some of those dollars. Massachusetts has our market, so that they can help stabilize milk prices to their agriculture community, but Vermont produces 60% of the milk that's consumed in the New England states. We're not purchasing that milk, we're supplying that market. So we really don't have a way to put a surcharge on milk that you would purchase at the store in order to cover some of that cost that would be any meaningful tool. We have looked at that for many, many years, and it just isn't any way to make that work. Another one of your questions was diversification and how to make that happen. And we are seeing some diversification in the agriculture community. We have a huge group of individuals that would like to work the lands and do some kind of a diversified farm. And we're seeing a lot of those farms come up. I noticed right here at Knops Farms, they're selling beef now. They have a little store out front. Well, when I started doing that, you know, there was only 1 or 2 people in Addison County doing it. Now there's about 30, and we're competing against one another. And so it makes it hard to really, you know, make a good return on that. We have a huge land base in the state of Vermont that can produce a wide range of agricultural products, but we haven't developed any markets for any of those products now on a large scale, with the exception of milk. And we have a lot of diversification in milk production itself. We have a lot of farmhouse cheese operations. You know, we have a person that's making butter from a few cows that they're selling for a substantial amount of money in a niche market. We have some folks that are making cheese locally that are shipping it to California for a huge price. We're talking to the farmers receiving somewhere around $15 to $17 a hundredweight, and by producing these products, you know, they're getting probably a return of $90 or $100 a gallon, or a hundredweight, I should say. So there are some opportunities, but they're very rare, they're very small, and if everybody started doing it, again, we would saturate that market, and it is a specialty market. Now, what was the first question you asked me?
Well, I was really looking at, do we have any industries that benefit from agriculture, that there is some slack where the state could tap into? For instance, Chris wants to charge everybody $1 to clean up the lake. But that kind of thinking, where our other industries will benefit because our farms stay in business, as opposed to all turning into suburbs.
Everybody benefits from the viable working landscape in the state of Vermont. We all enjoy it when we drive through our communities. We all see it, and that includes the forestry community as well. But I've got to tell you, we're here and nobody wants to pay an additional tax to support that environment. And by the way, when we talk about the large farm versus the small farm versus the medium-sized farm, one of the things that's happening is, and it's around water quality related issues, the cost of operating a business today has gone up substantially just for that simple reason. And a lot of the farms now, there's an incredible amount of paperwork those who are recording every activity you do, because every farm field that you do any activity on, it has to be recorded. The date, the temperature, you know, the rainfall, whatever you're doing there. You need to record the yields that you're taking off. You need to record the fertilizer and the manure that you're putting on a regular basis. You have to be in compliance with your nutrient management plan, which is a very detailed document that you have to follow. So really what we're asking is, you know, these farms to have a compliance officer that's taking care of all this stuff on a daily basis. So what we've done is we've allowed this, and I'm not opposed to what we're doing. I'm just saying we need to be aware of what we're doing and what we're asking the farmers to do. So what's happening is that the medium-sized farms and the smaller farms are finding it difficult to be able to work the hours they're doing just for the production practices, to take care of feeding and milking and taking care of the animals, versus doing all this extra bookkeeping work that you have to do in order to be in compliance with the water quality rules. So it's created another level of stress and opportunity, I guess is what you call it, because the folks that are doing this really appreciate what they're doing. What we just heard was that it's beneficial to do a lot of these practices, but it takes time to be able to track and document everything you're doing. So, and nobody's stepping up to the plate saying we're willing to pay a little extra to make sure our farms and forest lands stay where they are.
I think that's a government responsibility.
Not the government.
So just over the border in Quebec, there is a system that delivers a higher price for milk, and but it's a quota system. And I remember one of the first meetings I went to a decade ago was looking at U.S. milk prices, Vermont milk prices versus Canadian milk prices. And the concern was that if we ever had a quota, it would drive the price of milk up. But there was a very small increment. Canadian milk was not that much more expensive, but and it rose over time, sort of a fairly steady line. But if you looked at the U.S. milk price, it was a real roller coaster. They ended up overall, if you drew a line in to average them all out, they weren't too far apart. But the take-home of that story for me was that you were in a tough marketplace in the United States. You were going to be up, down, up, down, up, down. And the Canadian price was going to be a lot steadier because of that quota system. It's a little like, you know, it's a closed system. So that's the way it works. It doesn't seem to fit for the Vermont or American personality, so we have gone that way. Harvey's talked a little bit about diversification. So Farm to Plate we started in 2009, which was looking at dairy within a food system. So, and we've seen Vermont has actually increased the number of farms in the last decade after decades of decreasing. So smaller number of dairy farms, but a larger number of farms overall. And that's part of that diversification. So I think 10 years ago when people talked about beef, that was not, people were a little skeptical about would we be doing beef, or wine, even more skeptical, or breweries or distilleries, even more skeptical. Small farm cheese operations, and yet those things have filled in this whole circle of growing new and different crops, turning them into value-added foods, getting a better price in the marketplace, and then managing the organics, that the waste stream back the other side, back to compost, back to the farm. And that whole food system view of agriculture and food, where we've increased manufacturing jobs 6,400 people since '09, and over $100 million in new receipts. So it is it's an evolving marketplace, and big dairy is going to be tough, and I think everyone's going to find their own path forward. And some are going to. I talked to a large farm operation, northern part of the county, and he was talking about these low milk prices right now. And he said, "Well, I know how to survive these, and when my neighbors go out, I'll be buying their property." So not everyone looks at it as a downside. So I'd say it's a dog-eat-dog world out there.
Yeah, I'd like to respond to that a little bit. Back a few years ago, the last time we did the United States U.S. Farm Bill, we had a group in Vermont who, dairy farmers working together, came up with a milk stabilization program that
would look at milk production, cow numbers, but also young stock numbers. And if the milk started to increase in age or in production, they could see that, because we know what we have in inventory for animal numbers for both dairy producers and young stock in the marketplace. And so what it was, the idea was, if you saw this going up, there'd be an incentive for getting rid of some of your young stock in order to keep a constant supply of milk. And I got to tell you, they did a great job. They traveled the United States to talk with people from coast to coast. They actually went out to Wisconsin, set up a booth out there and talked to, that was the World Dairy Expo out there that they had. They talked to dairy producers from around the nation and actually around the world, and trying to find a way to stabilize milk production in the United States so that we wouldn't be in the situation we're at today. They were making gains, they had quite a lot of support, but in the end it didn't survive going through the Congress and the last farm bill that we had. So, I mean, there's been many attempts, Chris is right, on the quota system. We've discussed that as an industry a number of different times. We don't have an appetite for that in the U.S. For whatever reason. And so this was the next best thing that would be out there. So there's been several attempts, and I've got to tell you that Vermont farmers take a leadership role in some of this stuff. As I just pointed out, the dairy farmers working together with a Vermont organization that really worked hard on this. But they're also taking a leadership role in finding solutions to water quality initiatives. I think that we're way ahead of most states in what we've done and the commitment to making that happen. So my hat's off to the farmers that are out there and doing what they're doing, because they're leaders in our nation.
David Clark from Middlebury. Just to get on another topic, actually, I wasn't here last week, but I just want to thank the members of the legislature for getting through the let's say the gun safety rules that came out. I know some people think that these were more for show than for actual, that they're going to have any benefit, but I think there's something to even passing something that, even if it's just for the show. I think it was good. I think we're following the nation on this, and I want to thank you all.
Are you going to have on dairy some more, or another topic?
Another topic.
Okay, before we leave dairy, I'd like to have Charlie Roy, President of Addison County Farm Bureau, step to the mic and just invite you people to come to a special event that's happening and promote the idea that we've got some special people coming in to help answer the problems we're talking about today.
Thank you. We got two things going on Saturday, April 14th at the VFW in Middlebury, Vermont on Exchange Street. One of them is we get a Dr. John Newton from the American Farm Bureau. He's an ag specialist, ag economics, and he's coming to speak on a new farm bill that's coming out forward in Washington, D.C. Also a new dairy farm revenue protection plan, along with some other things that's very, very important for the farm industry. So we have that going on from 3 to 6 o'clock at the VFW on Exchange Street in Middlebury. And then following this, Addison County Farm Bureau, as we have been doing for the past 3 years, we're putting on a free spaghetti dinner. Appetizers are at 6:30. The dinner starts at 7, goes to 8, and then we have the horse traders playing afterwards. It's a completely free dinner. It's just to help show your support for the farmers. Say thank you to farmers. Come and meet farmers in the area. The only thing we ask, like I said, it's free of charge, is maybe bring a food gift or a food shelf. So we hope all the legislatures and everybody get there. But from 3 to 6, it's this pretty important program with Dr. John Newton that's going to be there. Thank you.
You'll notice on your tables there are some of the flyers that go with the dinner part of this program. I'd like to have you take them with you to put them in local stores, promote the idea so we get a good turnout. Our numbers have been increasing each year for this activity, and hopefully we're going to bring in some of the farm groups to be there to talk to Dr. John Newton.
You don't have to be a farmer to attend.
No, just interested in it. There's a lot of interested people in here, so come and have some fun and enjoy a dinner with us. One item I used to, he heard this joke many times. An old farmer was asked what he'd do if he won the mega bucks. His answer was, I'd farm until it was all gone. A couple of points I'd like to make before we leave this topic, and as moderator, probably shouldn't do this, but the thing you want to realize is we get bigger and bigger farms in the state. Most of these farms that are big farms today are family farms still. There's brothers and sisters and fathers and mothers and grandfathers that are running these farms. Now, when they want to get out of it and retire and let somebody else do it, they better have a family behind them. I know of one farm in the area that's been trying to sell the farm for many years, and at a $22 million asking price, that's $5 million down that you'd have to have, and I'm not sure who would want to put that kind of money into the operation as it looks right now with the prices of milk. So we need to be careful about how big farms really get, because it's going to be very hard to pass them on, and we should be looking at a way to help farmers fund these to be able to do it, and hopefully keep them family, not big corporations that are going to come in and take over. So with that, we're going to leave dairy, and thanks Heidi for getting us on the road today, and we're going to turn it over to this young gentleman.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Will Mathis. I'm here on behalf of BLSG and Site Control District. We serve the towns of Brandon, Leicester, Salisbury, Goshen, and Pittsburgh. We have a concern regarding the S-197 bill. We're looking for additional information regarding the strict liability toxic substance release. Specifically, Section 6686, liability for release of toxic substances. Any person who releases a toxic substance shall be held strictly and jointly and severely liable for any harm resulting from the release. Does this pertain to certified pesticide applicators?
I'll talk with you when we finish, write down the members and go do some research. I don't know that's a very specific question. I'd want to double check on that. The bill came out of Senate Judiciary, and it actually grew out of the whole PFOA spill exposure down in Bennington County. The idea is that we are exposed to many different chemicals out of manufacturing processes in particular, and they can have, like PFOA, they can be associated with cancer-causing agents. And so the strict liability says that, bill says that if you use a chemical like this, even if it takes 20 years for the harm to be demonstrated in neighbors surrounding that property, you still end up having a liability for having created that exposure. And when I first heard about it, I was a bit surprised, because people were pointing out you could be operating with a permit and still end up with a liability. And so there was quite a bit of back and forth. But the things that were pointed out to me, amongst other things, were that you could have an inspected car, you could be a licensed driver, you could be operating at the speed limit, but you still have a liability if you're following too closely, for instance. Or what if it's foggy? So going 50 on Route 7 turns out not to have been prudent. You were driving faster than you could sort of safely drive should something pop up. Well, so the whole notion is to try to bring a notion of prudence in terms of choice, even if you're within a permitting requirement. So permits are not an absolute protection. They are just, you cannot exceed something, can't speed more than a certain level. So that in the end, we have people who have had their health damaged, and there are businesses that have caused the releases that led to these damages. And we said, should that be up to the family that's injured to cover all their medical expenses, or should they be able to go back to the corporation that exposed them in the first place And then in the Senate, we decided, yes, it should go back to the source of the problem in the beginning. You might say, why are we in this situation? There's the Toxic Substances Control Act from the 1970s was a federal law to try to limit our exposure to potentially toxic chemicals. The first step that law took was to grandfather in roughly 59,000 chemicals. In the years since, we've added 100,000 more chemicals to commerce, and TSCA, the Toxic Substances Control Act, has chosen to regulate 6. So it's an infinitesimal amount of regulation, and it's left all of us. It sounds melodramatic, but it is just literally true. We are all poisoned to some level by tens of thousands of chemicals on a weekly, yearly basis. Do they get to rise to the point of actually making us sick? That's what we find out over time. And so the strict liability law says, let's encourage those using chemicals to be more prudent up front, make choices that are less likely to expose people to harm in the long run. But I will find out a particular, get you an exact answer on that question.
Claire? And to Mr. Mathis, I was copied on an email from someone at the Department of Ag to Ben Lawton, one of the Brandon people in the Mosquito Control District, and they opined that in fact that the Mosquito Control District was covered, that they were exempted from that in the language of the bill. I apologize, I thought it was a natural resources bill, but that was the opinion. I'll work with Senator Bray and make sure that we can nail that down. Are you from Goshen? Are you one of the...
From the mosquito control. So is that actually in the bill? Because we didn't see it yet.
I didn't see it. I just saw an opinion from someone at the Department of Ag to Ben Lawton.
Yeah, we also had a bill that we worked on in the House. Pete, do you remember what number was? 103, was it? Anyways, it was kind of along the same line. Even though EPA and the United States Food and Drug Administration set some limits and some tolerances on there, this created a greater risk associated with anybody that uses that along the same line. So I don't have a direct answer for you on there, but I had some serious reservations and concerned about that, because if we're following all the rules and what's on the label, we still could be held accountable for it, and that troubled me it troubled me a lot.
Are you on this topic or a different one?
Oh, I'm not sure what topic I'm on. I'm lost. So.
Well, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Good. I'll sit down.
All right. I'm Spence Putnam from Weybridge. And Robin, I think you mentioned bonding. And I think bonding is usually used for long-term expenditures at the state, and particularly infrastructure. We've got a lot of concerns about infrastructure. We've heard about sewer spills and things like that. And you don't have to drive more than about 50 feet on Vermont roads this year to get a jolting reminder of the need to invest in our highways as well. And a specific concern I have about our bonding capability is that I've heard that the governor wants to use some of this power to address water quality issues. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about where we stand in terms of in other words, you're going to fix our problems.
Nothing is ever simple. So the capital budget is a 2-year budget. We run concurrent with the biennium, so we're in the 2nd year of the biennium. So we can spend a bond for about $133 million over a 2-year period. And so we set the whole budget for 2 years in the first year of the biennium, and in the 2nd year we look at it and say, well, what's different? What do we know now that we didn't know last year? And how do we make little adjustments to it? But one of the things that's been consistent these past 2 years is we have put in about $46 million, I'm rounding my numbers here, for clean water projects, specifically dedicated to clean water. This includes working with the Department of Agriculture on best management practices, required agricultural practices, CREP, and also with the Agency of Natural Resources on ecosystem restoration and protection grants. So we have a lot of money that we give to farms and to municipalities. Municipalities might be combined sewer overflow issues. We hear about that a lot about that in Rutland and Virginia are two that come to mind, but they're not exclusive to those two communities. The bonding is for anything that's going to be a long-term project. So most of these projects, people borrow money for 20 or 30 years. So it's usually for equipment. It's often used as grant funding, where there's a match either from a community or from a farm or business. So we have, as I said, it's about $47 million over a 2-year period right now that we're doing with clean water. Some of the ecosystem restoration grants are related to municipal roads. A few million of that comes out of the capital budget, but there's another budget, and that's the transportation budget. And so they have money in there for certain other programs related to infrastructure that are roads and bridges and those kinds of things. So we're kind of attacking it from several different areas. The general feeling is that borrowing this money, we have a finite amount that we can borrow and keep our bond rating high. If our bond rating goes lower, the interest rates that we get charged to borrow that money goes up, and those interest rates get passed along to our municipalities. And so we don't want to raise rates for our community. So there's a finite amount of money that we can borrow. We don't have it's not like a money tree where we can just keep pulling money down for this project and that project. So we have to be really careful about how we spend the money. And the estimates for clean water over 20 years have been somewhere around our share, 1.4 billion, 1.6 billion. I'm looking at Senator Gray, something like that. We don't have enough money in the capital budget to fund and solve the water quality problem. It's going to be from a number of places that we're going to have to take care of that.
We've made, we're building right now in the FY19 budget the biggest, broadest, best funded clean water program in the state's history. But it has, I was talking about how we do a 2-year budget on capital dollars, and we've had a boost of nearly $50 million in capital spending. But that has come at you think of your own home, you know that you might need to replace windows, paint the house, maybe there's a new roof coming, and then you work on your driveway, whatever it is. There's a lot of capital projects in the state. They far exceed what we could spend if we put it all into clean water. We would not be taking care of many other things. However, for a variety of reasons, the treasurer recommended a year and a half ago that we could have particularly high level of capital spending into clean water, and that launched us into a higher level of performance on clean water work across the board, which is required to meet Vermont law and to meet our federal obligations for the Lake Champlain TMDL. We have an obligation to perform at a certain level. So the challenge for us is that we got this 2 years of extra money that we could lean on the capital bill for now. But the treasurer also told us at the time, at the outset, this is a bridge. This is not, you don't get to just rely on that. It would be unwise and we'll be short of money. So like any real bridge, you need to come down someplace, and what we're figuring out, there's a bill we just passed through the Senate, it's in the House now, S260 says, when we come down off the bridge, how do we continue funding our clean water obligations at the same level or higher, and what are the funding sources going to be? So that piece is in development, and I hope that we see it passed out of the House in the next few weeks. To be honest, though, the governor has put it on the veto list, even as it passed the Senate 29 to 0, for two reasons. One, that because it contemplated figuring out how we might raise the revenue, and he's not interested in new revenues. He said that was unacceptable. And the second thing was he thought there might be some separation of powers between legislature and executive branches, that he can
agree with. So 3 times now I've asked the Secretary of Administration for an explanation as to what these potential veto objections are. And 3 times I've been declined. We'll be asking for testimony in person this coming week because we need to get to the bottom of this, because it is a long-term commitment that the state has, again, to ourselves, to Vermont law, and to federal law. We need to fund it at an adequate level, and the TMDL that we signed with the EPA says there must be a long-term funding plan in it. S260 figures out a way to develop it. If the governor doesn't approve of that potential way of raising it, we're asking him to develop another plan and show us that.
Robert and I still live in Cornwall as far as I know. Chris, and you brought up chemical toxicity. As a few people know, when I graduated from high school, I spent 12 years in the United States Navy with a lot of chemical exposure. I had personal experience with that. Be happy to share it with you afterwards. If the information helps in some way that you're trying to work with this, happy to give it to you.
Thank you.
Yeah. But that brings up some other things that tied into what we inadvertently got into last week, a little bit of an extemporaneous discussion. But the toxicity of the health issues of recent legislation. Brought up today was the environmental impact that we're having with our water and the issues of pot that we're seeing across the country are a risk to Vermont at some point. And so I don't know what the questions are, and I'm sure some of the answers are, but I also know that Dr. Antley came down from the north because she heard we had this talk last week. So I would just like to introduce the environmental challenges if we get into pot, because it's going to go beyond farms, it's going to be on other stuff, because the commercialization of that is having an incredible impact in Colorado. We need to be sensitive to that. The other thing is, with regard to last week's discussion, I went back and got some information if anybody's interested. I have it over there in some handouts. The one that stood out in my mind came from England, and it was from a Professor Murray, the Institute of Psychiatry at King's College in London, said, "I don't think any serious researcher or psychiatrist would now dispute that cannabis consumption is a component cause of psychosis." So this is a risk factor, and I think we still need to address it even as we pass. Would you like to speak?
Happy to. I guess there are a couple different ways to go with that. Again, my name is Catherine Antley, and Dr. Burton invited me down to address some of these issues. We do know that in Colorado, in California, and in Colorado, we have an enormous pesticide issue and environmental damage from the legal and illegal industry of marijuana. And what we're finding in Colorado is that the illegal industry hides behind the legal industry. So we are having a lot of difficulty actually reining in what's behind what's out there as legal and illegal. One issue that's come up all across the country is we have this phrase, we're going to tax and regulate. And the issue is that across the country where we've legalized and supposedly regulated, we aren't successful in regulating. So we are taxing, we're making it legal, but we're not regulating. So in these states, we have the highest THC levels on the face of the earth. We have the highest pesticides, heavy metals, molds, and bacteria found in quote-unquote medical marijuana. So we just have this huge difference between what we think we're doing and what we're actually doing. Another thing that passed, going through the legislature right now, is the ACEs score. So we're trying to control the adverse toxic events that happen to kids. And we had a film in Burlington, before last, which went into this. And one scene in the film was, we can identify these toxic events that happen in kids' lives. We can go and abate them, ameliorate them, and have long-term impacts on our children. So in terms of psychological damage, even heart attack, cardiovascular issues and whatnot, and even cancer. For example, lead. We can go into a house that has high lead, we can assign a social worker, we can abate it, we can make it better. This is at the same time that we have put more, legal marijuana in every home potentially. So those are some of the issues. I'm happy to answer questions, and I have a lot of material if you're interested. Thank you.
Lori Cox Ripton. This isn't directly related to that. It's more some of the other things we've talked about, including the funding and the bill like Chris was speaking about, that where the governor has said that he doesn't want to see it move forward because it might potentially in another iteration look for funding. And I know that nobody celebrates, well, probably nobody celebrates paying their taxes, but I have been on the select board in my community for over 30 years, and I know that if people know what they're getting for their money and value what they're getting for their money, whether it is education, whether it is roads and other kinds of infrastructure, people, they want those things and they're going to pay for them, just like they're going to, if they want a new car or they want electricity in their house, they're going to pay for them. And I would heartily encourage the legislature to stand up to, if there are things that we need as a state. I mean, the truth is that a lot of times, if you can look at it, what can I say, creatively, like with the healthcare, if you can actually save money for us by having the primary healthcare, be a public service, you might say, then it's money we're not paying through our insurance companies. I mean, there are always things that you can, there are benefits. If we want to have a viable state, we need to have good education for our young people. There are all these things. So I say, yeah, it's not like you have a blank check to just buy whatever you want, but if there are things that are important, they're important to spend the money on. That's why we have a government.
Hi, I'm Ken Tahasik. I'm from Salisbury, and maybe I'll amplify a bit what Lori said. I'm standing up just to offer a perspective because I live in Salisbury, but I'm hardly here. What I do for a living is I travel around the U.S., Canada, and the UK, and I basically entertain people by telling them stories. I'll tell them any story they want to hear, and what they want to hear about is Vermont. And that's what I want to talk about, is how strong our brand is, our culture is. It's internationally famous, and that is our value. The things that add to that is what is in all of our benefits. Without things like agriculture, our historic landscape, our historic buildings, our quirky way of living, our town meetings, the fact that we're all a bunch of hippies. Without those things, we're Mississippi. We have everybody who owns property in this state has a vested interest in all of these things that make us Vermont. If you own property, if you own any business, I think the notion that other businesses support agriculture, any business in this state owes its existence. Any business that has the word Vermont in it owes its existence and its success to agriculture, to historic preservation, to the fact that we're a bunch of hippies. So I just wanted to say that I'd be happy to talk to anybody, but I encourage our legislators to not be afraid to invest in goofy things like historic preservation in the agricultural community, because that's who we are. We need that investment. And I can't tell you how strong, I could go to Saskatoon And they know Vermont. They know Vermont better than they know New York City. I live outside of Middlebury. Oh, I've been there. I can't tell you how strong that is anywhere I go in the world. So I just wanted to offer that perspective.
Still got about 10 minutes. Yes, young lady.
Barbara Andrews from Salisbury. I just want to add that another one of our appellations, the high-functioning weirdos.
Any other questions this morning? Tim?
Want me to fill your time?
Sure.
I'll go back to agriculture, because it's what I know. Claire said when she was starting off, and I almost jumped up for an educational moment, but she mentioned that we spent $60 million on current use in the state, and I just wanted to make you take a moment to educate people that current use is really not spending anything for farmers. It's creating tax equity for farmers as a class of businesses, because everybody else pays their taxes, their property taxes, based on the value of their home. If you're a business, you pay your taxes based on the business, the value of the business. If you are, whatever you are, you pay it based on the value of what you're paying. In agriculture, we pay based on the highest and best use, which is development. So over time, it becomes a huge burden. So the current use tax program was to set up tax equity for everyone, so that everyone would be on that level playing field. The $60 million someday could go away if we took on as a policy of the state current use tax assessment. And we said, oh, well, agriculture is important to us. Let's just tax everybody in property taxes at the current use value.
Just to, well, first of all, I think the good news is I have never heard in 16 years anyone say, let's get rid of current use or use value appraisal, I think is the technical name. And the other technical correction is that we're supposed to be paying on fair market value of the property that we own. So there is a little bit of difference. We set up the special category of use value for ag and forestry land because the value of it can't be realized until it's sold or products from it are sold.
No, that's accurate. I had one other thing that I wanted to mention. We lost another farm in Vermont last night, and I think it's significant to the legislators and significant to all of us that who knew Keith Wallace. The Wallace farm burned last night. Rosina Wallace was still milking 20 cows on the farm. All 23 animals died in the fire. The barn burned, the house burned, everything that was on Blush Hill and Waterbury is gone. And if you have a chance to send Rosina a card or express your regrets and your sympathies with Rosina, I'm sure it would be helpful to her.
What added comment to that? Just one added comment to that. Rosina's a good friend of ours, and I saw it early this morning on the news, and it was really desperate. But they have started a fund to help. They've collected $6,000 as of this morning early. So if anybody's so inclined in that direction, the farm, as she said, and we know her so well, that the farm has always been her life. She and her dad ran it until he passed away, and she's been running it on her own. And it's a great
emotional thing for her as well as she's so dedicated to it and farming in general. So please think that way.
That's terrible, terrible news. We don't know them, but my heart goes out. Barbara Andrews, Salisbury. I just wanted to make one more comment about the dairy situation. It seems to me there's an interesting irony and an elephant in the barn when you think about milk. Now put an S on that. We aren't talking about milk anymore, we're talking about milks. Everything from almond to oats is used to make milk. And that's something that we're going to have to deal with, that concept, because people are substituting anything you can think of for milk, which was a perfect food when I was a child, and I think still is.
I guess we could solve the problem by drinking more milk. But you know, the distributors and the retailers of milk, you notice when the price for the farmer goes down, the price in the store really doesn't go down. Well, they figured out that over the long run, you're going to buy that gallon or 2 gallons of milk for your family every week. So why should they move that price down? And that's another reason why you don't see consumption gaining any. So we need to use more of those products. That would help. And talking with one of the people that work in one of the cooperatives, and they said if every dairy farmer across the country cut their production by 3%, that would help solve this problem. But dairymen have always been very independent people, as most Vermonters are. Maybe it started in Vermont, moved to California. They just don't seem to get together to get the job done and watch the market and make it work. Comment?
Yes, John Flowers, Addison Independent. I was wondering if I could get a quick update on H911, the alternative, the education income tax proposal.
I'll take a shot at this. H911 is actually, it's a tax bill. A big component of it is a change in education funding. So this passed the House. It's currently in the Senate. I'm not sure what its status is there. This is also on the governor's veto list. The education tax portion of it, put pretty simply, is that it would shift about $60 million from the property tax to the income tax using an income tax surcharge. About 85% of that would be shouldered by those making over $100,000 or more. And on average, across the state, again, on average, that 59 million would end up with a property tax rate reduction of about 15 cents on your home site value, your house and 2 acres. Beyond that, it doesn't make a lot of significant changes. The rest of the bill deals with taxes. More broadly, one of the interesting quirks of the federal tax bill is that the state of Vermont was going to take in an extra $30 million just as a result of the math involved. This bill does take that, return it to taxpayers on a more progressive scale. There's also part of it that would eliminate taxes on Social Security for those folks making $45,000 or under if they're a single filer, and I think it's $60,000 or under for married filers. There's some other, what's that? Oh, and the earned income tax credit would go from 32% to 35%. And the earned income tax credit has really been shown to be one of the most effective sort of tax breaks that help lower income folks. So I'm not sure where it stands in the Senate. It's a big bill, it's a complex bill. It's on the governor's veto list. Whether it makes it out of the Senate as it made it out of the House in the same form is anybody's guess at this point.
I just wanted to, when Kim was talking about the farm burning, there was a palpable sense of sadness to me from anyone in the room, whether they know anything about that farm or that family. And I think we've talked about a lot of technical things in here today. So you hear about use value, bombs, ratings, EPA, TMDLs. The encouraging thing to me is that we keep coming together week after week, town meeting after town meeting, year after year, to work on these things together. And I think, although we have plenty of challenges, I love this state and the people in it, and I'm really glad that we're all here today working on this.
Thank you for those last remarks, Chris. Thank all of you for being here today. That's the end of our meeting this morning, and I'd like to remind you that our next meeting is the Ag Luncheon next Monday at noontime in Bridport at the Grange Hall. So we'd like to see you all there, and remember, you're all invited to the dinner dance, even if you come just to eat dinner and then shake a leg a little and then leave. That'd be great. Let's give our legislators a round of applause.